What's happening? So we just did a post. Check our latest post on the danger zone, authoritarianism, and enlightenment. If you got an hour and 20 minutes, it is. Whew, I just keep seeing more of like the best recordings on YouTube ever. And then I listen to the next one and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is the best recording on YouTube. So, Kahneman's statements. This is back to Jensen and Erhard, putting integrity into finance, capitalism, and society, and the need to resort to the workaround of nudging, see directly below, lead to one to conclude that powerful explanations. If you're just checking in, we have parts 1 through 3 up so far. Explanations for behavior do not, as a matter of course, provide any powerful access to altering that behavior. At least in this case, with irrationality, the biases of intuition, and simplifying heuristics that do such a good job explaining counter to self-interest behavior. To deal with the problem that explanations do not alter behavior, Thaler and Sunstein 2008 in their book Nudge provide a workaround for this problem. Also see Goldstein, Martin, Cialdini's 2007 Yes, 50 Secrets from the Science of Persuasion for extensive discussions of ways to nudge people into acting a certain way. Thaler and Sunstein argue that persuasively that people can be directed, nudged into acting into their own self-interest. Nudging accomplishes this by eliminating the requirement to choose between the alternatives, the scandals. You can choose to go this way or the scandalous way. Eliminating the requirement to choose to make a decision is a way to work around people's so-called irrationality provoked by the biases of intuition and simplifying heuristics that are triggered when one must make a choice. For the most part, nudging towards the requirement for people to choose decide between alternatives by presenting the alternatives by with a default condition nudges people into acting a certain way. Those who structure what is being dealt with decide is in the person's group or organization's own self-interest. What does heuristics mean? As Thaler and Sunstein acknowledge, nudging is paternalistic. In their words, libertarian paternalism. However, as they also acknowledge, when employed by the unscrupulous, nudging can be downright manipulative and used to exploit people. In any case, while perhaps an effective workaround, nudging is not a resolution of the problem of altering the counter self-interest behavior explained by biases and heuristics, meaning a rule or piece of information used in the enabling problem-solving decision making. Okay. Heuristics. This happens, you do this. What did I say it was yesterday? It was not that. That was the vibe I said. What do you call it? So it's one of the best ways to tell people what something is to tell them what it's not. And that's what they're doing here is they're saying nudging is not a resolution. By contrast, as we will show, unconcealing the actual nature of the impact of integrity on performance, which happens as the result of the new way we model integrity, makes present in real time both the relation between acting with integrity or not, and the consequences of such behavior on workability, well being, and the opportunity for performance. In other words, this new model of integrity is not only reveals the counter to self-interest impact on an individual, group, or organization that results from out of integrity behavior. It does it does so such that acting without integrity occurs or shows up for a person along with the undesirable impact on value and performance. In short, acting with integrity or lack of it and resulting desirable or undesirable impact on value and performance arise together. It is critical to note that when an out of integrity action occurs for an individual, group, organization, or even for you or me, at the same time as counter to its self-interest, the likelihood of acting in that way is significantly diminished. In addition, our new model of integrity reveals exactly what constitutes out of integrity behavior. This contrasts dramatically with the way in which integrity currently occurs for people as a normative phenomenon, wherein a great deal of out of integrity behavior does not occur even as out of integrity, and certainly the present and future consequences of such behavior do not show up along with the behavior. We'll link all this below. While we explicate more fully what we mean by occur, they put in parentheses there, show up. Love that interpretation of occur. An oversimplified example of what we mean by occur shows up in the following: the way something is understood by us or seems to be for us in a result of the way we frame it. Consequently, change your frame for something, and the way you understand it and the way it seems to be for you will change. That is, the way in which it occurs for you will change. This is in sharp contrast with the way biases of intuition and simplifying heuristics function, where at the time of behavior that results from these biases and heuristics, the damaging impact of one's self-interest is invisible. In fact, at the time, it actually appears to the person that the behavior is in their self-interest. It is only from a third person perspective that the behavior that results from biases and heuristics is seen as counter to one's self-interest. And this includes the person, group, or organization themselves when later they have the distance for a third person perspective on their earlier behavior. It is important to keep in mind that even knowledge that biases of intuition and simplifying heuristics will result in actions that are counter to self-interest does not impact people's behavior, and this includes even people with the knowledge and experience of Daniel Kahneman, as he himself acknowledges in the above quotes. Rather than an explanation, see our previous video for those quotes. Rather than an explanation for the behavior, this new model of integrity makes present the consequences of the behavior at the time of deciding how to behave. And when the consequences of this are, or this or that behavior are palpably present in making a decision about how to behave, one is more likely to behave in one's actual self-interest. This shift in the way out of integrity behavior occurs to an individual, group, or organization, occurring both as out of integrity and as counter to one's to its own self-interest, is the access this new model of integrity provides to altering behavior. Boom, no nudging needed. The counterproductive effects of the term irrational behavior. There is no doubt that 20 or so biases of intuition and simplifying heuristics described by Kahneman and Tversky cogently explain what is termed irrational behavior. While we have no argument with the accuracy of the explanations, we argue that the counter to self-interest behavior is identified by default as irrational behavior because it was researched within the context of the rational-minded paradigm of psychology and within the utility maximizing individuals acting in perfect markets, people acting in their own self-interest paradigm and of economics, unfortunately labeling the behavior as irrational while explaining the behavior perfectly, says nothing about the source of that behavior. So you can explain the bus was late and that's why you're late. Moreover, using irrational to counter or contrast with rational elicits an attempt to explain the presumed rationality rather than to gain access to the source of the observed behavior in that way that in a way that allows one to alter that behavior. In fact, explaining the behavior associated with the biases and heuristics identified by Kahneman and Tversky as irrational obscures something critically important about the impact of those biases and heuristics. A person with a normal brain acts in what appears to that person's brain, to be in his or her self-interest. We are saying that a person acts in what appears to be their self-interest, given the way in which what they are dealing with occurs or shows up for them. In other words, we argue that the biases and heuristics identified by Kahneman and Tversky actually alter the way in which what a person or entity is dealing with occurs for that person or entity. And the biases and heuristics do such that counter the self-interest behavior appears to be in the person or group's self-interest. Saying the same thing in another way, given the way that what we are dealing with occurs for us, we make what appear to be rational choices given that occurring. While, as we said above, from a third person perspective, and even for the person themselves, when later they have the distance for a third person perspective on the earlier action, so well worded. The action at the action that at the time appeared to be in a person's self-interest may in fact prove to be counter to their self-interest. A person's behavior will be fit for the way in which what the person is dealing with occurs for that person. We argue that biases and heuristics described by Kahneman and Tversky would actually provide access to self-interested behavior if they were treated as impacting the way in which a person dealing with what occurs for that person. If one is aware of the biases and heuristics described by Kahneman and Tversky and aware of the uh, and aware that those biases and heuristics are altering the appearance of what one is dealing with so that what appears to be rational in one's self-interest is in fact not. One would take a second look at the situation in the occurring impact by those biases and heuristics, the action that subjectively appears to be in one's self-interest is in fact objectively counter to one's self-interest. From the perspective of the rational irrational interpretation, given the way in which what the person is dealing with occurs or shows up for that person, the choice appears rational. As a consequence of the foregoing, we strongly prefer counter to self-interest behavior over irrational behavior, as Kahneman himself declares. Like most protagonists in debates, I have few memories of having changed my mind under adversarial pressure. We're like expecting people to yield right then. But I have certainly learned more than I know. For example, I am now quick to reject any description of our work as demonstrating human irrationality. When the occasion arises, I carefully explain that the research on heuristics and biases only refutes an unrealistic conception of rationality, which identifies it as a comprehensive coherence. Was I so careful? Probably not. Italics added. Carefully examining every dumb act in our own lives, it is clear that each seemed like a good idea at the time. For example, desirable and perfectly rational in that the costs were less than the benefits. Given the way that we are dealing with what occurred for us at the time, we made the act dumb was not irrationality. Rather, it was the way in which what we were dealing with occurred or showed up for us at that time. By labeling the behavior irrational, we scholars end up skewing our research to find the source of irrationality rather than to find the source of the behavior. If what we have to explain is irrational behavior, we are not looking for what causes behavior. We are looking for what causes the irrationality. When biases and heuristics are accepted as the explanation for the counter to self-interest behavior, that stops the inquiry. As explanations, biases, and heuristics leave one with no actual access to transforming the counter to self-interest behavior. As we said, Kahneman himself says, what can be done about about biases, except for some that I attribute mostly to age? My intuitive thinking is just as prone to overconfidence, extreme predictions, and planning fallacy as it was before I made the study of these issues. The lack of impact of these biases and heuristics as explanations leaves one with little more than looking for a way around these biases and heuristics. By contrast, if I am aware that the bias and or heuristic leads me to what I am dealing with occurs for me such that I would normally or even automatically act contrary to my self-interest, that awareness alters the way what I am dealing with occurs for me and consequently results in altering my behavior. Boom. All right. Like and subscribe. Hope you're having the best day ever. What do you call it? Oh, you don't have to understand any of this. There's a lot of this you won't understand. You don't have to believe any of this. None of this is true. Um, yeah, it just seems to be a lot of debates right now around, well, A, biases, B, irrational behavior, and C, oh no, sorry, I lost my train of thought. It wasn't that important. Um, yeah, check out that latest post in regards to that hour 20-minute YouTube video. Mind-boggling. Not true, not don't believe. Um, yeah, I mean that's pretty much the point is that oh yeah, the whole thing about like how two people can see the exact same thing and get two different outcomes out of it. This is it. This is the hidden power of context. That's why so many people are using the word context because they hear other people using it. Um, or it's seeped its way into, into everywhere. And that too, it's like not about who wrote this or any of that. It's about the ideas that work will live on. The ideas that are unworkable for people will eventually die off. Um, it just needs to be in a world of acknowledging those ideas and playing those ideas out and so forth and so on. what was the other debate thing? Oh, like the whole true and false thing. People are like, oh, can we have truth? Can we have facts? Like, all these things, or even feelings, like all of these things are ultimately their real feelings, their real tr truth to that person, their real facts to that person. So people are alternative facts. I mean, yes, they're just getting that. It's just watered down. What it is that's all the sea of opinions. So facts, truth, all sea of opinions. What y'all want is reality. That's what you really want. So, uh, anyway, peace out. I'll drop something else soon. Bye bye.